if you look back now at the warnings she made about what the consequence would be of leaving in the kind of way Boris Johnson wanted to do for Northern Ireland, for our economy, those warnings have been proved exactly right.
We now know there will not be a May election. It's a Theresa May election, of course. The former Prime Minister has this morning announced she'll stand down from the Commons ahead of the general election and quit her Maidenhead seat after 27 years. She was on Times Radio back in September speaking to Ruth Davidson.
The Oxford English Dictionary's definition of woke is well-informed, up-to-date and chiefly alert to racial discrimination and injustice. And on that basis, who would not want to be woke? It invites the question, Theresa, are you happily a woke woman?
In the terms of that definition of somebody who recognises that discrimination takes place, sadly, that term has come to be used again as part of this absolutism and polarisation of politics.
So you are woke and proud?
Yeah. Do you remember? It's a bit like being asked in the old days, was I a feminist?
Yes.
And I wore a T-shirt which said, this is what a feminist looks like. I've always said that immigration has been good for the country. I think the concern that people have is always around numbers. And often, actually, the people who feel most about this issue are people who see least migration in their own communities. I mean, you look at somewhere like London, which is hugely diverse, and it's not the issue in London that it might be in some other parts of the country.
That's Theresa May speaking to Ruth Davidson on Times Radio. Well, Lord Barwell, Gavin Barwell, was by Theresa May's side in Downing Street as her Chief of Staff, and he's with us now. Lord Barwell, good morning.
Morning.
First of all then, will Parliament, to what extent, I suppose, will Parliament miss the woke Theresa May?
I think Parliament will miss her. I think she set a really good example for future Prime Ministers by staying on in the House of Commons for 5 years after she left number 10, and she's made some important contributions over those 5 years. I hope future Prime Ministers follow her example. I also think she was a very passionate constituency MP. She won't have taken this decision lightly. She took huge pride in being the MP for Maidenhead, and I know from first-hand experience how highly regarded she was by her constituents. So she valued not just holding some of the most important offices in the country, Prime Minister, Home Secretary, but she also took huge pride from being a local MP for the place where she lived.
That first-hand experience, can I just ask you about that? Because I think as we're sort of judging listeners' reactions as they come in this morning to her departure, there's obviously a kind of local connection from some who are in Maidenhead, and we've heard from a couple this morning, but then also this more distant reflection on Theresa May where people's only connection to her is via those offices of state, Home Secretary or Prime Minister. And it seems to me as though there are quite contrasting recollections of her depending on how close to her you may have been.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, people who know her better will have a better sense of her, but she was definitely highly regarded as a constituency MP. I think when you come to look at her record as Prime Minister, I'm obviously biased. As you said, I was right by her side. I think she had an almost impossible job to do. She inherited after the Brexit referendum. There was no plan at all from the Leave campaign about what Brexit should look like. Parliament was incredibly evenly divided. So she wasn't. You can't say her time as Prime Minister was a success because the job she had to do to get Brexit done, she wasn't able to do. But I also think if you look back now at the warnings she made about what the consequence would be of leaving in the kind of way Boris Johnson wanted to do for Northern Ireland, for our economy, those warnings have been proved exactly right. And she made some really important decisions when she was Prime Minister. The commitment to net zero emissions by 2050 was one of the things that took place during her time in office. So I entirely accept that people are going to have mixed views on a time as PM, partly based on their politics, maybe on their views on Brexit. But I don't think anyone would deny from any political party that she was hugely well regarded by her constituents. Yeah. There's one other point I just wanted to make, which is it's International Women's Day today. Her and Harriet Harman are both now going to be standing down at the next election. And I think they are the two people who've done most to change our parliament, get more women into parliament, ensure it better reflects the population as a whole, and that is a really important long-term achievement that they both deserve credit for.
And an important consideration as well. May I ask, Gavin, was there ever tension for you in Theresa May's desire to be a constituency MP during her time as Prime Minister? I find this quite fascinating that in theory, on paper, you are still serving constituents, but obviously your constituency grows massively when you're Prime Minister and you're serving the whole country as well.
Yeah, I think for anyone who's served as a minister, there is tension because you have these two jobs you're trying to do at the same time. And if you look at the American system, you don't have that. Their ministers are not members of Congress. But she regarded it as a real asset. You'll know how much of a kind of little bubble Westminster is and the kind of groupthink you get there. And quite often we'd have had a pretty grim, difficult week. She'd go back to the constituency. She'd go out and knock on doors, talk to her constituents. And she felt that feedback she got from people outside the Westminster bubble was hugely helpful to her as she wrestled with these incredibly difficult decisions. So I think she drew real strength from it.
It's fascinating, actually. And it's not every constituent, I suppose, who'll get a knock on the door from the Prime Minister of a Saturday morning or afternoon.
So I've been out canvassing with her in my own constituency when she was Home Secretary and when she was Prime Minister, and it was always amusing to see the reaction of someone when they open their front door and the Home Secretary, the Prime Minister, is standing at the front door often with security officers just at the end of the drive, keeping an eye essentially.
Yeah, might be quite disorientating, I suppose, in many ways.
Come as a surprise.
Yeah, exactly. It is interesting, isn't it, what you say as well about her doing 5 years as a backbencher post PM life, if I can put it like that. There are other prime ministers who have kind of hovered around the House of Commons before either being cast out in recent times, or some who are perhaps still cashing a cheque while committing to other engagement. Is there a consideration here in how prime ministers should behave after they are out of office but still sitting as an MP?
Yeah, I think not many people get to do this job, and they have experience that can benefit the whole House of Commons. And so I think staying around and contributing to national life is hugely important. And politicians are different. Some people become MPs because they want to become Prime Minister. And other people draw real strength from just being an MP. And she was definitely in that latter category. Yeah. There's one final point, if I may, that I wanted to make, which is whatever your views on the decisions Theresa took, I can vouch from personal experience that in terms of a sort of dedication to the job, being across the detail, and sort of standards in public life, I think there is a real contrast between her time in Number 10 and what followed her afterwards. And that's something that we should remember and hope that future Prime Ministers follow.
She'll be in the House of Lords before too long, I'm sure, sitting near you, Gavin, at some point.
We'll see.
Thank you very much. My decision. No, of course. Thank you very much. Good to speak to you. Thanks for your time this morning. That is Lord Barwell, Gavin Barwell, who was Theresa May's Chief of Staff in Downing Street. Well, let's get the thoughts now of Times Radio's senior political correspondent, Patrick Maguire. Morning, Patrick.
Good morning, Chloe.
Your reflections on, Theresa May, her career, but also on her standing down now.
Listening to that rather wistful account from Gavin Barwell, which you'd expect, and I don't mean that pejoratively. Gavin Barwell, clearly a great deal of affection for Theresa May. He was at her side through that incredibly difficult 2017 to 2019 period where she tried in vain to unite the Conservative Party behind her. This feels like the passing of an era in Conservative politics, and by that I don't mean that in the usual way you'd use the cliche, the end of an era, but it's a moment of generational change. But what is less clear is what she is leaving. What is the Conservative Party Theresa May leaves? Prosaically, and this may be part of the reason she's standing down, it's a party that's going to lose an election quite heavily, and who knows whether Theresa May's Maidenhead seat, which has long been a target for the Liberal Democrats and is exactly the sort of seat the Liberal Democrats are targeting, is going to turn yellow at the next election, and that might have influenced her thoughts. And it's also worth reflecting on, I think, what Theresa May very famously said to Conservative Party conference in 2001 when she was chairman of the party. She spoke very eloquently, and perhaps surprisingly, given some of the policies she subsequently pursued as Home Secretary, that the Conservative Party had become the nasty party in the eyes of the electorate. And almost a quarter of a century on, you see a significant body of opinion, perhaps the ascendant body of opinion within the Conservative Party, tacking very hard to the right on some of those social and cultural issues in defiance of what Theresa May said then, and concluding that that is their electoral future. There was consensus broadly for Theresa May's entire period in government, and certainly on the opposition front bench, that the Conservative Party's future lay in representing and embracing the social changes of modern Britain. And perhaps the most significant change, and I wonder whether she considers this a personal failure on her part and a personal failure of her generation of leaders, is that consensus has been ripped up and smashed to bits.